So thank you for being with us. Jane Maria Butler in her ads against you references a radio interview you did in 2018, KXRW Radio, and says you want to raise taxes on small businesses by 20% and higher income tax on families $2,300. I've listened to that entire interview, and I don't hear you say that.
Yeah, but of course I don't say that. This is just another attempt by my opponent to deflect attention away for her own record. I have spoken about how the 2017 tax bill disproportionately advantages big corporations and wealthy Americans, and we need to make some reforms that prioritize working families and small businesses. It's been my position for the last 3.5 years, as well as my concern that the bill adds $2 trillion to the national debt that all of us will pay for. This massive tax cut for big corporations and for wealthy Americans needs to be replaced by true tax reform that prioritizes working families and small businesses. So thank you, Dan, for raising this issue and calling it out potentially for what it is, which is a very misleading ad.
I want to make sure I understand. So you say that it's a travesty, that you hate the entire bill, I'd like to throw it out. Then you go on to say the cuts that are in the bill need to be made permanent. What are you talking about there?
So I don't know what they're talking about as far as the cuts that are made. So let me just clarify what my position is. My position was I thought the bill was wrong, that it was Republican-led and passed without any bipartisan cooperation, that the bill prioritizes big corporations and wealthy Americans while having very small tax relief for working families and small businesses, and that it adds $2 trillion to the debt. And that our tax reform should instead prioritize tax cuts for small businesses and working families. So maybe you're referring to that latter part when I say things should be permanent. I do not think that the tax cuts which are permanent, which are those that go to big corporations, should be permanent. So
the way I understood it was you said the GOP tax bill on a whole is a travesty, except for the part for working class families, and that part should be made permanent. That's how I understood it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, I've consistently said we need to make sure that we have tax relief for working families and small businesses, which I said in the interview. Absolutely, Dan.
You said that you need to incentivize the tax system for businesses. What does that mean? Because she's accusing you of wanting to raise taxes on small businesses.
Again, I never know what she's saying in these ads because she's being misleading. What I think we need to do is to make sure that small businesses are protected in two ways. The first is to make sure we stop providing massive tax breaks for large corporations, because that actually hurts small businesses. They get bigger, they swallow up small businesses. We saw this myself in my own community growing up when big corporations were able to sort of do more effectively, especially during difficult economic times to small businesses. We ought to use tax breaks to incentivize small businesses to be productive, to hire workers, to be able to compete against large corporations. So that's what I'm speaking about and how we use tax incentives. We should also use tax incentives for small businesses while we encourage changes to the federal minimum wage so that people are working a family wage job. And so those are how you would use incentives.
So when she's saying you want to raise taxes on small businesses, it sounds like you want to give small businesses tax cuts.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite of that. But this is unfortunately what's known as a political head fake in politics, where if I say a tax bill is a travesty, because of what I've told you, which is it prioritizes large corporations and wealthy Americans, suddenly I want to hurt small businesses and working families, according to my opponent, when the opposite is true. But when you take corporate PAC money and you have all of that money to run hundreds of thousands of dollars in ads against your opponent, that's what you do. And that's why people really are tired of politicians. Dan, I've held dozens of town halls where I've clearly laid out what my tax plan is. And we have here somebody picking and choosing a few statements out of context and trying to run and win a political campaign based on that. It's simply untrue.
She has been bringing up recently in debates and in her ads now that your husband worked for a pharmaceutical company and you are going against pharmaceutical donations. Is that hypocritical of you?
First of all, this is why people hate politicians. She's very much like Donald Trump, where she's going after my husband and making an argument about my family's who has a retirement account. And she's doing it to draw attention away from the fact that she's taken $1.6 million in corporate money and has returned it in corporate tax cuts. And people are quite tired of this. She's somebody who, for over a decade, has taken money from Big Pharma and from the drug industry in the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And her response is, your husband has a retirement fund and used to work in an industry. The reality is that my husband has a retirement fund. It's entirely in stocks. It's entirely in bonds because he's investing in America. And what my husband does is irrelevant to my very clear position on prescription drug relief. So it's yet another attempt by my political opponent to have people focus on something that's absolutely irrelevant to my position on this issue in order to have them not look at her own terrible position on taking corporate money and voting their way.
Can't you see, though, how some people would think that that's hypocritical of you, that you're attacking Big Pharma, but your husband worked for Big Pharma? And
yeah, so I guess what I would say, Dan, is, my mother told me when I was 12 years old that I'm my own person and that I'll create my own destiny and I should have my own job and be there for myself. So I would talk to all the young women out there, all the young children out there, about how important it is as a young woman to do the same, to make your own destiny and not to be reliant on someone else. And I would also tell them at the time that you will get older one day and maybe you'll run for Congress. And unfortunately, somebody will run against you, calling attention to what your husband does as a way to deflect attention for their own record. And that is really a sexist remark that doesn't pay attention to my actual record on this issue. And this is why people hate politicians.
My wife's in the horse industry, and if I was running for office and I said horses are bad, wouldn't that raise some eyebrows?
It may raise eyebrows for people who don't know the clear record. I have, for 3.5 years, talked about the need for prescription drug relief for Americans. I've spoken about how we need to do more than has been proposed in Congress. And I've done it because I am my own person and these are my own positions. And to assume that somebody is going to vote the way that their husband tells them to is somewhat silly. Listen, Dan, I don't listen to my husband when he tells me to pick my clothes off the floor. I'm certainly not going to take advice from him on my prescription drug plan to provide relief for hundreds of thousands of Southwest Washingtonians.
Do you want to, what was it? Because you listen to the ads and people can think, oh, he was some CEO of a big pharmaceutical company. What was his job?
He was a low-level sales rep. Sorry, honey, he worked hard in that industry. He no longer does. And he has a retirement like many Americans, which I'll repeat, are invested solely in bonds because his retirement is invested in America.
And he no longer works for a pharmaceutical company?
He hasn't worked for the pharmaceutical company for years.
Okay. The ads, I don't know if I've ever seen this before. She's running ads, just recued ads from 2 years ago. It's the exact same ad. And I was stunned. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody rerun a political ad.
Yeah, nor I. So this is new for me, and I don't understand it. I think it's maybe that she's not paying attention to what I'm running on. I'm certainly not running on increasing taxes. My position on that has been clear. What I am running on is what I can do for the people of Southwest Washington. That's investing in our infrastructure. It's protecting affordable access to health care. And it's having a fair tax policy that puts Main Street over Wall Street. So I think what you see is a political campaign from my opponent that really isn't following what we're running on and is hoping that the people don't notice.
In one of your ads, you say something to the effect that she is too extreme. According to 538, which tracks how people vote, Congresswoman Laura Butler voted with Donald Trump the last term 69% of the time. Only 7 GOP representatives vote with him less often. So it looks like she doesn't vote with him.
Her voting rate, actually, sorry, Dan, 82% of the time. And on the issues that matter to Southwest Washingtonians when I'm speaking to them, affordable access to healthcare, tax reform, infrastructure investment, on these major issues, she does vote in line with the president. And so I think it's entirely appropriate to illustrate what those votes are. And those, by the way, are what my ads are about, which is her actual record.
So according to 538, the first her first term, but President Trump's first 2 years, she was within 90%, and then less, and then the average is 81% for the last 2 years, 69%. Um, what would you do about healthcare?
You know, healthcare is my number one issue, and I'm so proud to have the opportunity to talk to you about it, Dan. It's the number one issue because it is what I'm hearing from my constituents when I'm out there talking to them in the district or over Zoom. What I would do is protect the Affordable Care Act, which protects tens of millions of Americans who have pre-existing conditions. I would protect it for the tens of millions of more who have access to healthcare. So I think it's important. And also important to look at my opponent's record on this issue, which is to consistently brag about getting rid of it, including now supporting a lawsuit that's in the federal courts, which would put millions at risk. But Dan, I also think that we can do much more to provide healthcare coverage for Americans, which is why I'm in favor of a public option, which means that people can access health insurance directly from government. They purchase into a Medicare-like program if they want to. If they don't want to and they want to keep their private insurance, they have that opportunity to do so as well. And part of my healthcare plan, which is in my pandemic recovery plan, if you've seen it, is also about how to lower the cost of prescription drugs.
Do you think we can afford it?
I think we can't afford not to do something about this. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We have an administration supported by Republicans like my opponent who are trying to dismantle healthcare at a time that we need it the most. You know, everybody I talk to has a healthcare story. Maybe it's a life-saving drug that they can't afford. Maybe it's the fact that, like my mom, they don't feel that they could go to the doctor because they're afraid of healthcare costs. We can't afford to have people be put in the position where they're putting themselves and their families at risk by not taking care of their health.
I have friends who are business people in business for themselves. And one of them, because of the Obamacare, had insurance for the first time. I have another person whose insurance tripled in price. So I have two vastly different views of the ACA. One says it's the best thing ever. The other says this is horrible. How do you reconcile those?
Well, there isn't a one size fit all, you know, that there are problems with the Affordable Care Act, and it depends on where you're at in terms of your income and the health insurance that you're trying to access and whether or not you receive a federal subsidy. And so I think the true answer here is a public option, which again allows somebody to buy directly from government for their healthcare plan. And so it gives them that additional choice. Listen, I'm in favor of providing choices to people. When you have private insurers, when you have the Affordable Care Act, and when you have a public option, that will have the result of driving down costs. And I would ask everybody, what else do we have? We certainly don't have a plan from the Republicans. We don't have a plan from my opponents. What we have is them talking about how terrible our current plans are, but they really have done nothing in terms of how we're going to move forward to provide this much needed resource for people, healthcare insurance during the global pandemic. And I'm willing to continue working on this issue rather than telling somebody that they're going to get something that they're never going to receive, because we haven't seen it in 8 years. We haven't seen it certainly in 4 years under this administration, and we've certainly seen no plan from my opponent, Herb Butler.
As you know, people often vote with their pocketbooks. Tolling is a big topic of her ads. We saw Royce Pollard, the mayor of Vancouver, essentially lose his seat when his opponent said he was against tolling, and then Pollard said, well, I am for tolling because it's the only way to pay for it. And then the man who replaced him then flip-flopped and said, yes, I'm for tolling. I can tell you that when people say that you want to toll people to cross that bridge, that hits people hard. What are your thoughts about that?
Lies do. You know, I've never said that I want to toll the bridge. There's no record of me saying that. And this is just another political head fake from my opponent. I think the real question that I hear from people is, why hasn't the I-5 bridge been fixed in the last 10 years that my opponent's in office? It's actually been fiscally irresponsible not to have done so. It's now going to cost twice as much to replace it. Of course, it has to be replaced because it's an earthquake hazard and it creates a congestion problem. And in fact, my opponent was in a position to do much more about this project when she was on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and she left that committee. She not only didn't step up to the plate, she left the stadium. And so I think the question is, what kind of a leader is going to really make this their main priority? And that leader is Carolyn Long. Transformational investment in infrastructures is part of my pandemic recovery plan. I've been talking about it as a priority to help economic development in this region. But to your question, Dan, I've never said that I'm going to toll the bridge. And it is yet another lie from my opponent. And again, why people hate politicians.
How would you pay for a new bridge?
Well, I think the way to look at transformational investments in infrastructure is the fact that when you use federal dollars, these are our tax dollars, to invest in something like a bridge, that investment actually creates $2.20 of economic money, sort of money back into the community. So it does so in two ways. One is you are creating working family jobs for the iron workers, for the laborers who are going to build that bridge. And that money is then returned as economic stimulus into the economy. Infrastructure investments actually create economic growth in a community. So you would look at it as an investment in how we're going to pay forward in moving Southwest Washington to the great community that it is and the greater community that it can be.
But the federal government's only going to give you so much of it. I'm trying to mine my data banks. Was half, 2/3 of it, which still leaves several $billions that has to come from the states to fund this. Seattle just dug that tunnel. There's tolls on the tunnel in Seattle. How would you make up that multi-billion-dollar funding gap?
My responsibility as a federal representative, Dan, is to get as much federal funding for that infrastructure project as possible. So it is my role to do that. And it is my role to get those federal dollars. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to get more federal dollars for that I-5 bridge because it hasn't been fixed in the last 10 years. The states and the localities will come up with their ways to come up with funding to help that bridge. But I'm telling you what I will do as a federal representative, which obviously does include tolls.
Gotcha. So you're saying that the funding gap has to be made up by local and state representatives.
I think, Dan, when you're talking about infrastructure, as you mentioned, it's going to be something where there are multiple levels of government which have to come up with funding in order to pay for it. My responsibility as a federal representative is to get those federal dollars. And that's what I would do in my service on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I would work with both the Oregon and the Washington delegation to get those funds. That's my wheelhouse. That's what I will be doing.
Clark County was one of the fastest growing counties in the country for quite a while. And we know that home construction is one of the biggest drivers of jobs in the county. Years ago, I remember environmental lawyer, land use lawyer telling me that Clark County was already $1 billion behind in roads. Mm-hmm. How do you balance the need for Clark County to continue building to maintain its economy with trying to improve the environment?
So, I'm sorry, could you say that again? So you're asking a question about the environment and economic growth?
So much of Clark County's economy is based on building, and building affects things like the environment, wastewater, runoff, electricity, farming, open fields, open space. Construction is the economic driver of Clark County. I'm wondering how you reconcile how do you continue the economy going in Clark County with what you think should happen with the environment? How do you balance those two?
First of all, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? Which is that we can have strong economic growth in Southwest Washington by transformational investments in infrastructure, as I'm mentioning, which extends to sewer and water as well as roads, and also protecting the environment. And so you can have transformational investments in clean energy and renewable energy projects in our community. You could have strong environmental protection. So if building goes on, it's done safely. So it's not an either or proposition. And unfortunately, what politicians try to do is say you can't have one without the other. I reject that premise. And I think that you can have both. And we live in the most beautiful part of the state here in Southwest Washington. And that we need to make sure we protect Southwest Washington, which is to have environmental protections that help our clean air and our clean water. We have to make sure we have those clean energy jobs here so we're not reliant on the fossil fuel industry. And we can do that and still have growth within our community. So they're not, I wouldn't put the two against each other.
What do you think about ideas to remove the dams on the Columbia River?
I think that's something that's being studied. It's not something that I'm in favor of. I am in favor of better dam management. One of the things that I've spoken about repeatedly is the need to increase dam flow and spill to help our salmon population. This is something that my opponent disagrees with and has voted against. And I'm also so pleased right now that the federal dams are now, the dams now are actually required in their operation of the dams to make sure that the water is kept at 68 degrees, which is essential for the protection of our salmon habitat. So I think there are ways to manage the dams to make sure we preserve this clean source of energy while also preserving our salmon population.
My son is a wildland firefighter, and I am curious what your thoughts are about forest management. For
First
years,
of all, yeah, kudos to your son, Dan. You know, we saw firsthand the devastating, effects of the wildfires. I had my brother's mother-in-law lose a home. We've had family friends lose homes due to these fires, and I'm so admiration of folks like your son who are protecting us. You know, obviously, when we're talking about forest fires, proper forest management is something we need to always pay attention to. But the elephant in the room here is climate change. We have more frequent and more intense forest fires because the climate is changing, and we've seen the effects of those here in the Pacific Northwest. So I think we have to address the underlying problem. At the same time, we make sure that our firefighters are protected so that they can protect us.
There's so many issues that we could get wonky with. The reality is most of the voters get to know you and get to know your opponent through those political ads. So I want to return to the one that she's rerunning from 2 years ago that says you just moved here from Oregon.
Yeah.
Can you tell people your history?
Sure. You know, I've been teaching at Washington State University for 25 years. I have owned a home here in Southwest Washington for 3.5 years, and I've lived here with my family. And so I think it's important that people know that. But I think instead of just being here to let people know how long I've lived and worked in the community, I think the bigger question, Dan, is why is my opponent pointing this out? It's to deflect from her own record. If you look at the ads that I run in this campaign, I am focusing on votes that my opponent takes in Washington, D.C. when she comes home and tries to portray her as a different type of politician. I talk about policies like trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, whereas I'm presenting myself as somebody who wants to protect the Affordable Care Act and protect Southwest Washingtonians. My opponent has done the dirty business of politicians who decide that personal attacks and lies and misleading people is a way to electoral victory. I'm not that kind of a politician, and I'm not that kind of a politician because I don't take corporate PAC money, which controls how I vote on issues. I'm beholden to the people of Southwest Washington.
Did you grow up in Brookings?
I did.
Okay. And you used to live in Salem before you moved to Clark County 3.5 years ago?
I did.
According to 538, Jamie Rivera Butler was the 10th most absent in votes compared to all representatives in 2019. She missed 26.5% of votes in 2019. Is that a problem?
I think it is the responsibility of anybody elected to Congress to work hard every single day for their constituents back in Washington, D.C., but also at home. I think it's a problem when we do not see our federal representative here in Southwest Washington. I think it's a problem when our representative hasn't held a live town hall in the last in-person town hall in the last 4 years. I think it's a problem when a politician does a corporate PAC's bidding rather than voting for the people of Southwest Washington.
So 2017 is when she said she wouldn't vote for Trump. So we were supposed to time is fine. Do you have any idea where you are in the polls?
Yes, Dan, we publicly released our last poll that shows that we are within 2 points of Herrera Butler. You asked a question about Trump. I didn't catch it.
You said it's been 4 years since she held the town hall, and I was looking at the Columbian when she held the town hall where she said she wouldn't vote for Trump.
Correct.
That was 2017. So a little less than 4 years.
Correct. And she now, of course, has said that she will vote for Donald Trump. So I would just add, at a time when Republican leaders in politics, in the military, in business are fleeing from this administration, she's running towards it with open hands, and she's bought in on Donald Trump.
We're almost out of time, and I'm almost out of questions because I could get seriously into the weeds, and we're going to make.
I love the weeds, Dan.
Right, exactly.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, exactly. What are we missing? What's the main point that we're missing that you want to make to voters?
I think the main point is I'm somebody who is present, accountable, and committed to the people of Southwest Washington. I'm incredibly transparent, holding 46 in-person town halls last cycle, holding about a dozen virtually that are up on the web for people to see all of my positions. And now I'm doing drive-in town halls where I'm answering questions to people directly about who I am and what I'm about. I'm not somebody who hides from voters. I'm not somebody who runs a campaign based on press releases and negative ads. If you want to know who Carolyn Long is, you have every opportunity to listen to this interview and to come to my events to hear what I have to say about issues. And I'm somebody who's fighting for the people of Southwest Washington. I think that's illustrated in how I'm campaigning. It's illustrated in my pandemic recovery plan, which talks about our path forward. It's illustrated in my anti-corruption plan, which talks about the corrosive role of dark money in politics, which leads to situations like what we're facing now, where politicians try to distract you by misleading or outright lies in television ads. So I've given people a clear choice, and I hope they can see what I'm doing, which is working hard every day to earn their vote, to represent all of the people of Southwest Washington. And I'm somebody who, when you come to DC, you won't have to wait behind a corporate lobbyist to talk to me. I'll be there to talk to you.
Thank you very much for your time and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You too.